Moments after I sit down, McLovin raises to 30 from under the gun +1. I played with him my last session on stream, and I know he likes to open light. I'd like to get involved as soon as possible for those who are watching since the beginning and waiting for my seat to be occupied. I don't want to call and allow opponents behind me an opportunity to enter the pot cheaply. I put in a 3-bet to 100.
Brad, first hand
coming in firing.
He's ready to play today.
Gets out of the Uber and tosses wagering discs around.
McLovin has something that he doesn't want to call with. Right before this hand was dealt, McLovin and I were discussing the last session when we played together, and he brought up me 3-betting pocket sixes against Doug that resulted in us flopping a set and winning a big pot. He's aware that just because I 3-bet doesn't necessarily mean that I've got a premium hand. The opponent puts in the 4-bet to 375. Against almost everyone else I'd fold. In this case, I know that McLovin knows that I could have 3-bet light, so his 4-bet could be a bluff. There's a leveling war going on. We call for an additional 275. It's heads up in a big pot to kick this session off. The flop comes King Jack 4 with 2 spades and a diamond. We've got top pair. Chicka, yeah. The only issue is that our 7-high kicker isn't something that we can rely on, and we could be up against aces, kings, jiggities, or ace-king. McLovin slows down and checks his middle pair. He has showdown value and wants to get to the river cheaply. This pot has already gotten way too big for King 7, which I only got involved in a 4-bet pot with due to previous history with this particular player. I check back to keep things manageable. We've got an 82% chance of winning this. That goes down drastically as the 9 of spades comes out on the turn. The percentages flip now that the opponent has improved to 2-pair. He checks again, which I'm surprised to see him do as the pre-flop aggressor was such a strong hand. I figure he has something like ace-queen, ace-5 suited, or queens once he checks twice. Top pair is going to be the best a lot of the time when it plays this way. I bet 300 for value. There isn't really any hesitation. McLovin reaches for chips and makes the call. There's no reason yet for us to think that we're beat in this scenario. The river is the 5 of hearts. Since it's a blank, McLovin checks one last time. I have about a pot-sized bet left in the stack. I consider shoving for value since I don't anticipate being up against anything better than top pair after McLovin checks all 3 streets. There's a high probability that the opponent has exactly queens. The amount of times I can remember being in a 4-bet pot against Jack 9 is roughly 0. Just in case I'm getting trapped by a monster, I reel it in slightly and bet 800. This isn't going to work out too well.
Quick call.
I think Brad thinks he's good. You're not good. Jack 9.
And Brad steps out of the Uber.
Reaching into, look at that face Brad makes. Jack 9, really? Really, dude? That's how we're playing today? Yes, indeed. That's how we're playing today.
You can tell I'm caught off guard by the fact that the opponent not only 4-bet with Jack 9, but also drilled 2-pair on the turn and didn't bet it. I get punished for not folding pre-flop like I easily could have done to the initial pre-flop raise or subsequently to the 4-bet. Here I've straddled the 20. Gary Blackwood is in the hijack with ace-jack offsuit. He raises to 60. Radley's in the $5 blind with ace-4 suited. He calls for 55 more. We've got snowmen in the straddle and are going nowhere. We call for 40 more. It's a 3-way pot. We're stuck 2,000 at the moment. We're going to need all the luck that we can get. On the count of 3, smash that like button for extra run good. Ready? 1, 2, 3. The flop comes Queen 8-5 with 2 clubs. You guys did it. We've got middle set against multiple opponents who are drawing close to dead. The big blind checks. I check. Unfortunately, no one has anything. The pre-flop aggressor checks as well. The turn is the queen of clubs, giving us a boat while a possible flush draw gets there. Despite only having ace high, Radley is just 1 B away from having the best hand, or 2 completely different cards. He believes that he can credibly rep something strong like a full house, flush, or trip queens. Radley bets 110 in an attempt to steal the pot. Just like John Daly, that bet won't be working out today. We raised to 400. As we just went over, there are quite a few strong hands that the opponent could have bet with that would likely call a big raise or even re-raise. Even if Radley is bluffing with a hand only containing the ace of clubs with no other club, for example, he might call or re-bluff. Gary folds. I anticipate getting action from plenty of holdings still. Unfortunately, in this case, our primary opponent has complete air. He folds. We have a ways to go to get unstuck. It could take a while, but at least with this pot, we're headed in the right direction. The straddle to 20 is back on. Ron has 5-4 suited in the hijack and raises to 70. The button wants to get involved. He calls with ace-jack offsuit. We're in the big blind with ace-7 of clubs. I don't really love any option. In a normal cash game, folding to avoid the situation entirely is most reasonable. There's a little more pressure to get involved on stream. I was on the fence anyway. I call to make things interesting. We're going 3 ways to the flop. It comes 4-3 deuce with 2 diamonds and a club. We've got a gutter, 2 overs, and a backdoor flush draw. I check. Ron gets a surprisingly good flop for the hand that he raised pre-flop with. He has top pair and an open-ended straight draw. This isn't always going to be too incredible for his range when he's second to act and opens. Ron bets 90. Radley has a similar hand to me with a straight draw and 2 overs. He calls. When he doesn't raise on such a draw-heavy board, it makes it very unlikely that Radley has a set. He could potentially have something like ace-5 suited, but there aren't many combos of that hand that we need to be worried about. We've already discussed that typically the flop won't be great for the pre-flop aggressor's range, even though it kind of is given what Ron's currently holding. Our hand has plenty of potential, but likely isn't best. I don't want a flat to try and hit a 5, to probably chop with another opponent, or even lose if someone has a hand like pocket 6s. I've identified this situation as one in which my opponents won't always be strong. Us, on the other hand, we have a high percentage of monsters in our range. Let's take a look at the most applicable pre-flop chart that Nick Petrangelo gave me. It'll be part of a cash game course that we're coming out with on Upswing in a few months. This chart shows what we should do if we're in the big blind in a straddle pot and someone in the hijack raises followed by a button call. We see that with our actual hand of ace-7 suited, we can mix in calling indicated by the yellow or folding. We also see that we should be pure calling pre-flop raises with pocket 4s, 3s, and deuces. Those all give us a set on this board. We're supposed to call most of the time pre-flop with ace-5 suited and 6-5 suited as well, good for straights on this board. We have all the strongest possible hands in our range based on what we did pre-flop. With the hand slightly too weak to call, I represent the nuts or something close to it by putting in a check raise to 425. If it doesn't get through, I can potentially make a straight, hit an ace, or pick up a flush draw on the turn. Ron's stack isn't accurate in the graphics on the left, by the way. He has about 1,800 in front of him. The purple chips are worth 500 each, and he has 2 of those. Ron reasonably calls with a relatively strong hand and removal to the nuts, leaving himself with around 1,500 behind. Once he calls, I can rule out him having a set or a straight other than one containing 2 diamonds. Radley quickly folds, it's down to heads up. The turn is the 10 of clubs, giving us a flush draw. I love seeing that because we pick up tons of additional outs. Since Ron only has slightly more than a pot-sized bet left in his stack, I turn the pressure up to 11 and continue the story that we've got it. I put in 3 yellow chips that are worth 1,000 each and overbet shove for 1,500 effective. I anticipate being up against a pocket pair above 4s a lot of the time. We don't get snap called, so it's confirmed that we're not up against 2 pair or better. Ron is more than a 2-to-1 favorite, yet we've put him in the blender. I wouldn't want to be in his shoes. He's facing an overbet all-in after being downgraded a second pair with a straight draw, and there's only 1 card to come. Ron could already be drawing dead to a chop. Ultimately, the opponent folds. I don't blame him. I would have folded as well. We get a big semi-bluff through to win a nice sized pot. We're getting closer and closer to the even mark. We're only 1 big win away. While a few guys are still playing poker as if they're taking part in a preparation age commercial, Sashimi has pocket 10s in the hijack and raises to 30. Ron loves King Jack offsuit more than Matthew McConaughey hates wearing t-shirts. He calls with it once more. Radley's trying to fight, or is right, to sit down. He calls with 9-6 suited. McLovin has to make sure that Radley doesn't win the pot, otherwise McLovin will have to pay everyone $50, so he comes along for 25 more. We wake up with an actual hand in the 3rd blind. It's time to punish everyone with ace-king. I take a second to assess the situation and figure out the sizing that we should go with. I make it 200. Sashimi thinks that I'm trying to buy it. I wouldn't mind if everyone folded. You can see that I have the most equity, but it's still only at 28%. Sashimi puts in the 4-bet to 500. She's really only supposed to be 4-betting me a very small percentage of the time. Pocket 10s actually does better as a flat because Sashimi could be crushed or will be flipping a lot of the time. If she called and allowed the other players to call behind her, that isn't that bad since she'd be playing mostly to hit a set, and it's often good to have more opponents in the hand when you have a set, particularly when the stand-up game is on and people are playing all kinds of junk that they're incentivized to bluff with. Folds back to me. We know 1 ace and 1 king are accounted for, cutting in half the amount of combos of pocket aces and pocket kings Sashimi could have, which are really the only hands that Sashimi should be 4-betting us with for value in this spot. There are only 6 combos of those total. Meanwhile, there are 9 combos of ace-king still available that we could be up against, so I put her mostly on that, perhaps queens, jacks, or some other type of bluff. I call for 300 more, which I might also do with aces as a trap, and then hands like queens and jacks. We're heads up, the flop comes 8-8-3 rainbow, we've got nothing and we're up against an overpair. I check, the opponent doesn't need to bet too much here, she fires for 400. I could call because I'm getting a good price. I'm not 100% sure what I'm up against, but I've significantly discounted aces and kings since we have removal for those. Several other holdings will have a relatively difficult time calling a check raise when I can still have queens, jacks, and even rockets. Ace-king is still a very likely hand that we'll be up against. If I call here, Sashimi could potentially get me off a chop later down the road, but if I raise, she'll have to fold ace-highs, including ace-king, a good percentage of the time. If she calls a check raise, I can just give up if I don't improve, knowing with a decent amount of certainty that we're beat. One thing that I noticed from Sashimi in previous hands is that she tends to play very aggressively pre-flop and could have a wider 4-bet range than she's theoretically supposed to. With this in mind, I could actually have the best hand fairly often. I don't really like folding or calling and playing out of position in a large pot without a ton of showdown value. The opponent just doubled up and likely won't want to immediately lose a massive pot right after. The graphics for her stack are incorrect, by the way. It says that she has over 8,000 in front of her, but in reality, she has about the same stack as us. She's not going to want to get stacked after she just got those chips. If she has a close decision, I imagine that she may lean more towards taking a less risky line. I'm considering all these factors, then eventually decide I'm going for the home run. I make it 1,300. Sashimi isn't happy to see that. It's hard for her to imagine that I'd have called a 4-bet pre-flop, then check raise flop without something better than 10s. On the flip side, it'd be super sick if she ever shoved here as a bluff, since I'll only sometimes have aces, and I'll have to fold nearly everything else. There's no shove this time. Sashimi somewhat over-aggressively played her 10s, and I applied the aggressiveness right back to induce the fold from the best hand. We get a massive bluff through to break into the green today with some style points.
What a play by Brad. Incredible play.
Gets through.
Strong
And the
play.
Brad Owen fans go wild. Good play, Mr. Owen.
To a lot of people, that just looks like Sashimi made a bad fold, but Brad literally played that hand perfect, like he had jacks or queens, so she could have been dominated pretty easily there.
Somehow, all the major bluffs end up getting through for us. We finish the stream on the positive side of the leaderboard. A few of these graphics at the end aren't accurate because some chip stacks weren't right, but ours is correct. We wrap up the day booking a come-from-behind win.